Welcome into this week's edition of the Research Corner. I'm Tony Mulvey. I'm joined on the phone by senior editorial researcher Joe Antoshak. Joe, how are you?
Hey, Tony. Good morning. I'm doing well. How you doing?
I cannot complain. So, Joe, you and Kevin conducted a survey recently talking about AB5. Can you just kind of give a background on who was surveyed, and kind of what the basis of the survey was?
Sure. Yeah. So, right, AB5, kind of a constant news item over the last couple of years, and it's back in the news in the last couple of months. And so we thought, well, let's ask our carrier contacts what they, sort of think about AB5. We wanted to get through a lot of the lobbying storylines that you hear, and it's tough to know what people actually think about things sometimes. So we thought, well, we'll just ask them. And so this is what we got. We surveyed our carriers and sort of got their opinion on things.
And we'll bring up the first chart. It kind of shows how that we pulled up. It'll kind of describe this. This one's from a week ago, but that's okay. What you really saw was, 75% of those were for hire carriers.
That's right.
About 20% or 15% wanted in that owner op, 15 or 5% in the private sector. So, you really saw some of those trends that you saw more obviously for hire carriers, but you got kind of a little bit of everything and how they're going to conduct business moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. And then we also asked them how many tractors were in their fleet. And we saw actually a surprisingly even distribution for that. So, right, we had 5 different options from 1 to 5 tractors all the way up to 501 plus. And we were right around the 20% mark for each of those. We had a lot of respondents from sort of all over the trucking industry in terms of fleet size. So you kind of got a good idea of what these different sized carriers thought about AB5.
Absolutely. And then, we'll bring up kind of some of these responses. We asked this 1 to 5, right? 1 being the strongly disagree, 5 being the strong agreement. That's where you kind of saw what these guys were actually thinking, and maybe talk about some of the statements that they had the options to choose from, and then some of the findings based on the responses.
Sure. So I think we were somewhat surprised that most of the weighted averages were right around like the neutral mark. So sort of what we saw in the distribution of responses was that there was a big chunk of carriers who were strongly disagreeing with statements like, AB5 has limited my freedom of choice, right? There was another chunk that strongly agreed with a statement like that. And then there was, sort of a third chunk right in the middle. And so the weighted averages, for the most part, hovered right around that 3 mark. There were some exceptions. For instance, California's independent contract law has no impact on my business. That saw some slight disagreement. And then the statement, as I mentioned before, AB5 has limited my freedom of choice, did lean toward a slight agreement. But for the most part, it's like carriers are pretty split on sort of what they think about AB5 and its impact on their business.
Yeah, and we'll bring up another chart that kind of shows this, like you said, this kind of buckets that they where that weighted average comes from, that kind of gives the overall responses. We'll pull it up right now. And like you said, that first one, California's independent contract law has no impact on my business. You look at that and you see almost 60% of respondents say we strongly disagree with that, which tells me, hey, this really is going to have an impact, or they believe it's having an impact on their business.
Yeah, that's right. And then you see this response here at the end. I will be able to, but will choose not to do business in California if truckers aren't exempted from AB5. Not strong agreement, but you do see the most common answer was completely agree. So you get a sense that people do feel very strongly about AB5. It's just not, it's not a monolithic type of feeling, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there anything like, I know you said, was this kind of a surprise when you see this distribution in the way it was? I mean, in the responses, was it a surprise to you? Like, or is this kind of what you expected, just based on the rumblings that you hear in the news stories and interviews and and the like? I mean, was it a surprise?
Well, so I think I was surprised a little bit at the number of people who, we had sort of a text box option where people could just write whatever they wanted. So you can imagine that was an interesting bunch of responses. But I was surprised at the number of people who were in support of AB5 for, workers' rights, these ideals that AB5 is going to, make lives better for gig economy type workers, and in the trucking industry, that would be owner operators. There is a sizable chunk of carriers that we surveyed that think it's a very good thing for that, and I don't know that I was anticipating that many responses sort of pro AB5. Now, it is probably worth noting that the majority of those responses were against AB5. But yeah, it wasn't quite as clear cut as I expected.
Yeah, and I know in the paper itself, you talked about where those text boxes were, where they could write in the response, and there's a whole bunch of quotes at the end of the paper, kind of just outlining opinions on that. Was there any quote maybe that stood out to you that was either pro AB5, anti AB5? I mean, is there any one in particular that, hey, this one makes a lot of sense, it's a very well thought out response?
Yeah, so there are actually a number of them, and I encourage people to go check that out on the Sonar blog. You can download the PDF and see all of them. I was smiling when you started saying that, because I was just thinking about some of the responses that we did not include, which were very impassioned, I guess you could say. But so in general, the response that I thought was most compelling, sort of going against AB5 and the reclassification of owner-operators as company employees in California, had to do with the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach being these, largest import berths in the U.S. And the idea that, this legislation is going to negatively impact the supply chain throughout the whole country. And I think that's a compelling argument. And yeah, we saw a couple of people say things kind of along those lines.
Awesome stuff, Joe. If you want to go check out the survey, like you said, go check out the Sonar blog. Joe, anything else you're working on in the meantime around surveys or any other research that you're putting together?
Yeah, well, we have a handful of things in the works right now. We're going to be putting together a fleet matching apps survey here pretty soon. And then right now, also, we have a survey open for a broker pay guide that we're looking to put together. So if you are a representative of a freight brokerage and you're able to provide some pay information for brokers across experience levels, get in touch with me. We can basically present your company along with that pay information. It's a great way to hire brokers.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Joe, for joining me today on this week's Research Corner. Right now, we'll toss it back over to Kaylee and Michael.